The soft morning sunlight filtered through the curtains as Ethan sipped his coffee, a faint smile playing on his lips. His wife, Clara, hummed in the kitchen, her laughter carrying into the living room as she spoke on the phone. For Ethan, life felt perfect, or so he thought. That evening, as Clara excused herself to meet a friend, Ethan's phone buzzed with a message from an anonymous number. The words sent a chill down his spine. "You deserve to know the truth." Check her phone, confused and skeptical. Ethan dismissed the message as a cruel prank, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Later that night, when Clara was in the shower, Ethan hesitated before unlocking her phone, his hands trembling. The moment the screen lit up, his heart sank. There were messages, intimate and undeniable, between Clara and someone named James. His world tilted as he scrolled through the exchanges, each word a stab to his chest. Pictures followed, confirming what he dreaded most. Clara emerged from the bathroom, smiling at him, unaware that her facade had crumbled. Ethan forced a smile, his mind racing. He couldn't confront her now, not without a plan. He needed to uncover the full truth before taking any steps. Later that night, Ethan stared at the ceiling, his thoughts a storm of betrayal, anger, and confusion. His love for Clara warred with the overwhelming hurt she had inflicted. He resolved to act, but not out of blind rage. If Clara wanted to betray him, she'd have to face the consequences, ones she could never escape. The next morning, Ethan acted as if nothing had changed, masking his pain with a calm demeanor. Clara was oblivious, her usual cheerful self, planting a kiss on his cheek before heading out. Ethan watched her leave, his mind already devising a plan. He decided to follow her. Parking a safe distance away, he trailed her car as she drove across town. Clara eventually pulled into a small cafe, and Ethan's heart raced as he watched a man approach her. James, no doubt. They exchanged a brief hug, their familiarity unmistakable. Ethan's jaw clenched as he snapped photos from his car. Every moment felt like a dagger twisting deeper, but he knew he had to endure. He needed more than just circumstantial evidence. Over the next few days, Ethan pieced together Clara's carefully hidden double life. He found receipts for expensive dinners and gifts that had nothing to do with him. A mysterious appointment at a clinic piqued his curiosity further. His instincts told him this was important, so he called the clinic pretending to be Clara's assistant and managed to extract some shocking details. She had visited for a consultation with James, listed as her emergency contact. This wasn't just an affair. Clara and James were building a future Ethan wasn't a part of. The realization hit him like a freight train, but instead of succumbing to despair, Ethan felt something shift within him. The pain transformed into cold determination. If Clara had chosen betrayal, he would make her regret every lie, every deception. His plan was forming, and with every piece of evidence he gathered, Ethan felt closer to exposing the truth. Clara had no idea her carefully crafted web of lies was about to collapse. A few days later, Ethan's opportunity arrived. Clara mentioned she had a work meeting, but Ethan knew better. He had already confirmed that she and James had another appointment at the clinic. Disguising his anxiety with a composed demeanor, Ethan followed her once again. When she entered the clinic, Ethan waited just long enough to ensure she wouldn't suspect him. Then, clutching the evidence he had meticulously gathered, he walked inside. At the reception desk, Ethan calmly inquired about Clara's appointment, pretending to be her concerned husband. The receptionist hesitated, but Ethan's convincing tone and his knowledge of the appointment convinced her to direct him to the waiting area. There they were, Clara and James, sitting too close for comfort, whispering and smiling, as though they were a perfect couple. Ethan's blood boiled, but he restrained himself, knowing this was his moment to strike. He walked up to them, his voice calm but laced with unmistakable intensity. "Clara, I think we need to talk." Clara's face turned pale, her smile vanishing as she looked up at Ethan. James, visibly confused, glanced between them. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" Clara stammered, her voice faltering. "I could ask you the same question," Ethan replied, pulling out the photos and messages he had printed. He tossed them onto the table in front of them. "Care to explain this?" Clara's hands shook as she reached for the papers, her mouth opening and closing in a desperate attempt to respond. James shifted uncomfortably, clearly not expecting the confrontation. "You've been lying to me, Clara," Ethan continued, his voice steady but filled with suppressed anger. All this time pretending everything was fine. And you, he said, turning to James, did you really think you could sneak around with another man's wife and get away with it? James stood up, trying to regain his composure. Look, man, this isn't the place for... Ethan cut him off. No, you don't get to tell me what's appropriate after what you've done. Both of you have been playing me for a fool, but it ends now. The entire waiting area was silent, all eyes on the unfolding drama. Clara's tears started to flow, but Ethan didn't flinch. This was only the beginning of the reckoning he had planned. As he walked out of the clinic, leaving Clara and James to deal with the humiliation, Ethan felt a sense of grim satisfaction. The first blow had been struck, but there was still much more to come. The evening was set. Ethan planned everything meticulously, down to the smallest detail. Clara had no idea what awaited her when she returned home that night. She walked through the door, her face still carrying traces of the stress from the clinic confrontation earlier. Ethan, however, greeted her with an unnerving calmness, inviting her to join him for dinner. I thought we could have a nice meal and talk, he said, pulling out a chair for her at the dining table. Clara hesitated but sat down, her unease evident. The table was set beautifully, candles flickering softly, but there was an undercurrent of tension in the air. Ethan poured her a glass of wine and began speaking, his tone casual but deliberate. You know, Clara, I've been thinking a lot about trust, he said, taking a sip of his drink. How fragile it is, how easy it is to break. Clara's eyes darted nervously, her hands fidgeting with the napkin on her lap. Ethan, let me finish, he interrupted, his voice firm. He reached into his pocket and placed a small stack of papers on the table. This, he said, tapping the pile, is everything. The photos, the messages, the clinic details. I have it all, Clara. Her face drained of color, and she reached for the wine glass, her hand trembling. Ethan, I never meant to hurt you. Stop, Ethan said sharply, his eyes boring into hers. You didn't just hurt me, Clara. You shattered everything we built together. And for what? For someone like James? Clara's tears began to flow, but Ethan wasn't finished. He pulled out his phone and pressed play on an audio recording, the damning sound of her conversation with James from the clinic. Every word echoed in the room, each one a confirmation of her betrayal. You thought I wouldn't find out, didn't you? Ethan said, his voice cold now. You thought you could lie to me, build a life with him behind my back, and I'd just stay clueless forever. Clara sobbed, trying to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Then came the final blow. Oh, and by the way, Ethan said, standing up, James's wife knows too. I made sure of it. Clara's eyes widened in horror. You didn't, I did, Ethan replied, his tone unwavering. She deserves to know the kind of man she's married to, just like I deserve to know the truth about you. Ethan walked out of the room, leaving Clara to crumble under the weight of her guilt and shame. As he closed the door to their bedroom behind him, he felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. The woman he once loved had betrayed him, but now she was facing the consequences of her choices. The next day, Ethan's carefully laid plans set into motion the final act of his revenge. James's wife, Emily, had received the same evidence Ethan had confronted Clara with: the messages, the photos, and the clinic details. Emily was devastated but furious, determined to confront her husband. James returned home to find Emily waiting, the evidence spread out on the coffee table. Her piercing gaze made him falter before she erupted. How long have you been lying to me, James? How long have you been making a fool of me? James stammered, trying to find an excuse, but there was no way out. Emily didn't let him speak. She hurled accusations, her voice echoing through the house. By the time she was done, James's perfect facade had shattered. She threw him out of the house, declaring that their marriage was over. Ethan, watching from a distance, felt no remorse. James had willingly destroyed 2 lives, and now his own life was in ruins. But Ethan wasn't done yet. That evening, Ethan sent James's employer an anonymous email. Attached were the photos and messages, along with a note exposing his character. James worked for a prestigious firm with a strict moral code, and by morning, his job was gone. His reputation was in tatters. Meanwhile, Clara sat at home, devastated by the fallout. The calls from James stopped abruptly, and when she finally reached him, his response was cold and final. "It's over, Clara. I've lost everything because of you." Clara was left to face the crushing reality of her actions. She had betrayed her husband, destroyed her lover's life, and now found herself utterly alone. Ethan, on the other hand, felt a strange sense of closure. He hadn't acted out of rage, but with calculated precision, ensuring justice was served. The betrayal had left scars, but it had also made him stronger. Weeks passed and the dust began to settle. Clara tried reaching out to Ethan multiple times, but he ignored every call, every message. The woman who had once been his whole world was now a distant, hollow figure. He had no intention of reconciling, not after everything that had happened. He had made his peace. The truth had come to light, and Clara had faced the consequences of her betrayal. But the weight of it all still lingered in his mind. Could he ever trust again? Could he ever open his heart to someone without the fear of being deceived? One evening, Clara showed up at his doorstep, her eyes red from crying, her posture broken. Ethan stared at her, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," she whispered, barely able to hold herself together. "I never meant to hurt you. I was selfish, and I made the worst mistake of my life." Ethan remained silent, his thoughts racing. He had no desire to hear her regrets. He had seen the truth in her actions, and no apology could erase the damage. "I destroyed everything," Clara continued, her voice shaking. "I lost the man who loved me, and now I'm alone with nothing but my lies. Please, I know I can't fix what I've done, but I need you to know how sorry I am." Ethan finally spoke, his voice calm but resolute. "Clara, what's done is done. You've torn everything apart, and there's no coming back from it. I gave you everything. Trust, loyalty, love, and you threw it away for him. There's nothing left to save." She collapsed to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. But Ethan's heart didn't soften. He had learned one crucial lesson through this ordeal. Never let someone's betrayal define your worth. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Clara," he said, his tone final, "but you won't find it with me." With that, he closed the door, leaving Clara outside in the cold night. As the door clicked shut, Ethan felt a quiet relief. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming his peace, his dignity, and his future. As weeks turned into months, Ethan rebuilt his life. He focused on his career, found solace in his friendships, and slowly learned to trust again. This time, not blindly, but cautiously. The scars from Clara's betrayal would always remain, but they no longer had control over him. Clara, on the other hand, faded into the background of his life. The woman who once held his heart was now a distant memory, a cautionary tale of love lost to lies. The world had moved on, and so had Ethan. And in the end, that was all that mattered.